sleeping in empty small cities and towns of upstate, which bustle with manufacturing, mining, and farming. We all know from inspiration, history, and nature.
You thought it was your phone?
Turn to the success and growth of generations past. A birthright being squandered by corruption in Albany. And the depredations of an insecure, scheming mountebank posing as governor, who loathes both us and himself. As liberty beckoned to enslaved peoples behind the Iron Curtain via American broadcasts after World War II, we now say, believe, rise, and join us. Welcome to Radio Free New York.
Hey guys, welcome to Radio Free New York. I'm your host, Andrew Hollister, and we are here in the WYSL studio with Bob Savage.
Is that where we are?
That's where we are.
I was thinking this was Disney World.
Yeah, well. It's warming up enough that it feels like it could be. You know,
it's a weird day. It's like earlier this morning. I mean, I went out and I had to run errands. I was like, wow, I really need a jacket. And now it's like warming right up.
Yeah. Earlier, same thing. Was wearing a jacket. Now it's getting nice and toasty in here, which is good. So we got a lot of fun, different things to talk about today. One is I came across a op-ed article written by an assembly person about automatic voter registration. So we're going to cover that. And then after that, we're going to talk about Nevada's new legislation to essentially bypass the Electoral College for the upcoming presidential. So it'll be interesting. I'll tell you guys about that because there's a lot of moving pieces. I believe they are the 16th state to pass this type of legislation. We'll talk about this. We'll also talk about where New York sits on this because I learned some stuff about that I had no idea. So that's going to be what's going on today. And then if we've got some extra time, maybe we'll talk about the goofy debacle going on in the Rochester City School District. I'm actually hoping to get a teacher to come on the air and talk about what's going on over there with us because it's just out of control. So why don't we start with this op-ed? This is from Assemblyman Stripe, and it's titled, Why New York Needs Automatic Voter Registration. Now, I'm just going to kind of read through this with you guys, give you some commentary, give you my thoughts on this, because I think that there's some interesting things in here. So the first thing he says is the fundamental element of a healthy democracy is participation by citizens who are able to vote and speak their minds.
Let's stop right there. It's not a democracy.
It's a constitutional republic.
It's not a democracy.
Yep.
I think people on the left think it's a democracy. It's not a democracy.
And I think this actually speaks to like high school education.
Boy, does it ever.
I think that so many people that I come across of all ages, really of all ages, have no idea that we live in a constitutional republic, and they think that our government is a democracy, and it's not, and they don't know the differences either,
no.
Which is an issue because when it comes to a lot of things in government, people say, well, when you live in a democracy, and it's like, yes, when you live in a democracy, this is not a democracy.
I think I learned that when I was about, 11. Mm-hmm. I have no idea why people don't understand that this issue is even discussed, because it's obviously not a democracy.
And it comes up a lot. I mean, it does,
the Democrats are they're always talking about, Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy. Neither one of those is true. He's not a threat, and it's not a democracy.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And even on topics like, that have nothing to do with Trump, a lot of people still think that we live in a democracy, and we don't. So maybe someday we'll do a show and we'll talk about the differences between a democracy and a constitutional republic, and then
in short,
share that out to people.
Democracy is majority rule. 51%,
yes.
That's it. End of discussion. Mm-hmm. But the key term here is representative democracy and a constitutional republic. Yeah. So representative means everybody gets a vote. If you have majority rule, not everybody gets a vote.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So yeah, very first sentence, clearly there's some issues here. So we'll kind of go through this next piece, because the next sentence I don't disagree with at all. The next sentence is, to ensure this, we must break down barriers to voting. And I agree, we should break down barriers to voting. But I think he'll probably explain what he sees as barriers to voting.
Yeah, I would say that all depends on what you see as barriers to voting.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So he goes on to say, a simplified voting system allows more people to show up and vote, and in turn ensures the people running the government better reflect the will of the people. He then goes on saying, New York State has taken a major step towards this by passing sweeping election reforms designed to break down barriers to voting, such as early voting and consolidated primaries, which will expand the time frame that voters can cast a ballot and provide an opportunity for voters to vote on federal and state elections on the same day. That piece I agree with. I think that a lot of people don't realize what Board of Elections costs to run a primary. I think last number I saw, I think it's $18 million when they run a primary. So by combining state and federal elections into the same day, we've saved $18 million. I can get on board with that. He still hasn't necessarily said what the barriers are. I don't recall if he does. I read this, a little while ago.
If he means having to present ID to vote, I disagree with him.
No, I don't think that he brings that up in here. We'll see. Where were we here? Okay. All right. So we have also begun the process of passing a constitutional amendment to allow for same-day voter registration.
Bad idea.
No excuse absentee ballots. I'm not sure what that is. And pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. One more significant measure we should pass this year is automatic voter registration. It's interesting. If you have automatic voter registration, you probably don't need pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds.
What's the purpose of pre-registering 16 and 17-year-olds?
My guess is that they're registered to vote by the time they're 18 when they wouldn't. I don't know. He doesn't explain that.
No, what it is, it's obviously another attempt to in a sophisticated kind of way stuff the ballot box, because what you do is the public schools are run pretty much by the liberal left. Mm-hmm. And that's what the indoctrination is. That's what takes place in public schools. We all know it. Anybody who's a parent who's got kids in the public schools knows that they're constantly being drilled in. They're constantly having liberal ideas drilled into them all the time. And so if you pre-register them, then you can,
more Democrat
16,
voters.
17. Yeah, what you do is you stampede them into the Democrat fold. And that makes it that much more difficult for the Republicans to win elections.
Sure.
So that's a political thing. Same-day registration, if you take that and you juxtapose that with you can't ask anybody for ID at the polls, what you can have is you can have you have a busload of Palestinians show up in a critical election district, and they all just jump off and they just say who they are. I'm John Smith. I'm Freddie Jones.
Sure.
When really their name is Mustafa, and anybody can tell that by looking at them. And they all vote and throw the election.
Yeah. Well, I know that when you fill out a voter registration form, you have to provide either your social or your driver's ID card number.
Faked.
To
easy
at least
to do.
Validate, that you are who you say you are. But he actually doesn't hit that either.
How can the election workers verify anything if there's same day registration? They just show up at the poll and I'm here to vote. Here's my fake Social Security card.
Sure.
They can't verify anything.
Well, if the document's presented like as an invalid document, I don't know that we can protect against that today with the way the system works. because if you provide a fake social security card, it's not like Board of Elections keeps a copy of that. You know, they're just checking against the social security number or the driver's license ID number. You're not even present when they do it currently today, you know. So I don't know that even the way it's set up today that could be prevented.
Well, in theory, they could. If somebody shows up and it looks like it's a clear case of fraud, they can look into it.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And they
would not be able to do that with same-day registration, right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, because same-day registration, I would hope, and you know, I don't know what this would look like because I haven't seen it proposed yet. I would hope they would run a check against that driver's license ID number or that social security number, however they're doing on the back end currently. So I hope that system would be in place before that starts. Guys, we'll be back here in a moment on Radio Free New York. We're reading through Assemblyman Stripe's op-ed piece on why New York State needs automatic voter registration.
Your business relies on computers and technology to operate. Slow, unreliable networks and servers can cause unplanned downtime and affect your bottom line. The experts at Simple Tech Innovations are here to help. Their preventative maintenance program ensures that your computers and network are kept up to date and monitored for any issues, keeping your business running smoothly. They also help clients achieve HIPAA, PCI, and New York State cybersecurity compliance to keep your network safe and secure. Whatever your business IT needs are, Simple Tech Innovations should be your first call. They've won the best in Rochester 8 years in a row and have an A+ Better Business Bureau rating. Call them today for a free consultation at 585-200-3182. That's 585-200-3182. Simple Tech Innovations.
You're listening to Radio Free New York
on the WYSL stations.
All right, guys, I'm back here on Radio Free New York. We are reading through Assemblyman Stripe's Why New York Should Be an Automatic Voter Registration State. So this is an op-ed I found on in a Syracuse newspaper here, and just kind of reading through it, giving some commentary on it, because I think some of these things are a little questionable, and then other things I think actually have merit. So where we left off is basically he kind of gave a cap of all the things that New York is doing to break down barriers for voter registration, but he didn't actually list what those barriers are, which is a little disappointing because I would have liked to at least read through them and seen that. But now he's moving on to saying one significant measure we should pass this year is automatic voter registration. So he leads with, New York has one of the lowest turnout rates for elections. I kind of think that's probably because we run really crappy candidates, but that's just me, you know. People don't want to participate in the system that's constantly abusing them. That's my point of view.
Excellent point.
You guys might feel differently. That's just how I feel. He says, coming in recently at 48th for the 2018 midterm elections, more than 1/3 of all eligible voters in New York are not registered to vote.
Yeah, so because they feel that it doesn't make any difference.
Yep.
They just keep on, it doesn't make any difference who the candidate is, what the party is. Nothing ever changes.
Yeah. And this is talking about people who aren't registered to vote, not even the number of people that don't vote, just not registered. So that's a good statistic there. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. It then goes on to say, as the fourth most populous state in the United States, these numbers are embarrassingly low. Automatic voter registration would allow for 1.1 million New Yorkers, New York State residents to be registered to vote. By making the registration process as easy as possible, we can help turn around these numbers to ensure that nearly every New Yorker could have their say in the political process.
And, I would ask Assemblyman Stripe, if that 1.4 million was primarily Republicans, would you feel the same way?
Would he feel the same way? Yeah.
I don't think so.
I suspect he wouldn't. But I'm going to, once we get to the end of this here, talk about why some of his issues I don't necessarily agree with, but why I think our rights in general, and not just voting, we shouldn't have to register for. And part of my example will be we also have the Second Amendment, and we have a pistol licensing and pistol permit process. And if we go down this path of automatic voter registration, which I'm not necessarily against, actually, I believe automatic pistol permit application should also happen.
Oh, I like that.
And so I'm gonna, I think if we're going to be, we shouldn't be selective about the rights we're giving people.
Whoa, wait a minute. I don't think gun violence and because of Parkland
and anything else they come up with. So he goes on to say the recently enacted reforms will help, but automatic voter registration will help even more. With only a couple of minor adjustments to the current voter registration system, access to the polls would come to a simpler and more direct process. There are a few different models proposed for an automatic voter registration program, but essentially all eligible citizens would come to be automatically registered to vote either upon turning 18 or by interacting with state government agencies, whether it's the Department of Motor Vehicles or Social Services. He then goes on to say that it's been enacted in 17 other states, lists all those states, talks about a study performed by Berman Center of Justice and how it increased an average of 37% in those states, and it kind of just goes on and on. So what I'm going to say, and actually it's kind of I'm just going to point out for those listening that the way this is framed is very similar to the Obamacare argument, which is they said it's illegal for you to not have health insurance. And then the next year when people were forced to purchase health insurance, they said, look how many people got coverage that didn't have it. Yes, because you made it illegal for them to not have coverage. Just like this study saying that on average, it increased voter registrants by 37% in states where you are automatically registered. Well, of course, because you automatically registered them, like nobody shouldn't be anymore. That's like such a fluffy kind of
circular argument.
Yeah. I'm trying to use words that you can use on the radio.
Right. Well, the most effective and fastest way to register everybody and get the poll numbers up.
Yeah.
Stuff the ballot box.
Well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And there's something interesting that will hopefully come out in the next few months. I know there's kind of an investigation and maybe a lawsuit brewing in New York about something similar to that was found in the last election. I'm not really going to say anything about it because I don't know all the details and I don't want to misspeak or anything like that. But it will be interesting to see what comes of that. So I read through this article and I think, you know what? If you're an American citizen and you are of age to vote, you should be able to vote. And to me, it seems very silly to have voter registration. And the reason it seems silly is because something that I know Bob is very much in favor of is voter ID check at the poll. And since we're not doing that, what is the purpose of the voter registration? It's to register to a political party. I don't see any other true purpose for voter registration the way our system is today. I'm not saying this can't be improved. I'm just saying the way it operates today, the only benefit to having voter registration the way it is for parties to try to force people into their political box. And when somebody decides they do want to be politically active and they do want to go to the poll, they can tell you, oh, sorry, although you're an American citizen, you haven't registered for access to this right, therefore you can't have it.
Isn't it also for apportionment too?
For what?
Apportionment,
I'm not familiar.
Well, no, I'm just saying, the number of representatives representing a certain district and so forth. So isn't that key to voter registration?
Well, I think that's based on census. On the population
you're right.
found by the census.
Strike that last comment. You're right.
But to that point, the number of petitions you have to collect for a given party to get on the ballot is based on registered voters to your party.
Okay.
So that does exist. The way I see this working is if you're an American citizen, you turn 18 years old, you're just automatically allowed to vote. And sure, you could be, I guess, automatically registered to vote
with ID.
Yeah, sure, with ID. But you're automatically registered to vote, and you're registered to no party. Basically, you're what's called a blank voter, which confuses people a lot because they check the Independence Party checkbox on the voter form. They think that means they're registered independent. They're actually registered to the Independence Party. But that's how I see this working. Then what political parties would actually have to do is work a little harder for your vote, actually be about what they're going to be about. And instead of having voter registration drives, this to me is really silly. The fact that people have to have voter registration drives to encourage people to essentially register to have access to their rights. Instead, they could have, voter education booths where they could educate people on what their party stands for, the principles that their candidates carry, and why they should change their voter registration away from blank to a political party. I think that would actually make political parties better in the long term.
Here we go. Wikipedia says, I asked, what's the purpose of voter registration, please?
Oh, yes.
The register is used for tax lists, voter lists, membership in the universal health care system. What?
Interesting.
And what's the universal health care system? And other purposes, and it is maintained by the tax authorities. All eligible voters received a card in the mail before each election, which shows a date, time, and political polling place. So, I'm not sure I'm buying that.
Okay. So I could actually see.
Voter registration originated in the early 19th century as a method of disenfranchisement. How about a little of that? Many states concerned with a growing number of foreign-born transients participating in local government, so they developed a system of registration to ensure non-citizens could not vote.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So there it is. But you actually brought up something that I think is important that voter registration does actually do, and that would be that when you register to vote, they have your address and they do mail you. At least I receive a piece of paper in the mail every year of who my elected officials are, where my polling place is based on my address, all of that, where I would say, you know what? They could still send those out. They don't necessarily need to know where you live because they know that house is associated with that district and that elected person. So it could just be current resident instead of Andrew Hollister. They could still do that. And, if you're automatically registered to vote at 18 years old, they could use whatever address you have then. And you should, even if you move today, your address doesn't get updated with Board of Elections unless you actually reach out and update it. So in terms of this article, I think he wants this for other reasons. I definitely think so.
Really?
Yeah. But I'm saying it's actually not a bad idea. And I think that we should extend this to our other rights. So in New York State, there is a pistol permit process.
There you go.
And I say this, New York State, if we do automatic voter registration, we should also do automatic pistol permit applications. Now, what's this mean? They're going to have to change the pistol permit process because it costs you money. You have to hunt down references, all of this other stuff.
But you still want them to go through NICS, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to go through NICS every time you purchase a firearm.
I'm just saying automatic. Well, it's not automatic. You have to go through NICS. You have to pass the background check.
Yes, you absolutely would. But I'm saying that New York State should go and look and say, yeah, at 18 years old, or technically it's 21. So at 21 years old, you've got a clean record, you're a citizen in good standing.
Should be 18.
I agree totally. I think we did a radio show about that. I think we did a show. The music is playing, which means it's time for a break. So we'll be back here in a few minutes here on Radio Free New York.
You're listening to the voice of liberty. WYSL. AM 1040 Avon Rochester, FM 92.1 Rochester, and FM 95.5 Spencerport.
This is J.C. Glass reporting from Oak Hill Country Club, the second round of the KitchenAid Senior PGA Championship. Our leader, Scott Paralu, shot a first round 66, 4 under par, and he will tee off in about a half hour to begin his second round. Darren Clark has begun the day with a birdie on his first hole to move up to -3. Retief Goosen and Ken Tanagawa also at 3 under par, and they're just about set to start the second round for them. Nobody from the morning round made a move. The best round so far today, even par 70. Cut line currently sitting at 6 over par for the top 70 players, who will then move on to tomorrow's third round. Don't forget, free parking available today and throughout the weekend at MCC with a free shuttle. Take you right up to the entrance gate. Almost all of the lead players are out on the golf course right now. Good time to come to Oak Hill to watch some great golf. Our next report coming up at 2 o'clock. Reporting from Oak Hill Country Club and the KitchenAid Senior PGA Championship, J.C. DeLass for the WYSL stations.
Why do businesses choose to move their website from Wix and Squarespace to SimpleTech Innovations? Maybe it's their excellent customer service or attention to detail. Maybe it's their ability to give a truly customized solution. Or perhaps they just like the fact that SimpleTech is a local small business that builds great relationships with its clients. Whatever the reason may be, you can rest assured knowing that the local team at SimpleTech has your best interest in mind when building or updating your website. They're hands-on and love helping customers achieve their goals. But don't take my word for it. They've won the best in Rochester 8 years in a row and have an A+ Better Business Bureau rating. If your website doesn't match your dreams or isn't achieving your goals, give the professionals at SimpleTech Innovations a call today for a consultation at 585-200-3182. That's 585-200-3182. SimpleTech Innovations.
Aircraft Environmental Systems proudly supports Radio Free New York. Rochester-based leaders in climate simulation chambers for America's R&D laboratories. We're experts in troubleshooting, calibrations, custom designs, and consulting for more than 40 years. Industry pioneers, we created the first ever fleet of temperature, humidity, and altitude test chambers available to rent coast to coast. Trained and trusted by environmental chamber manufacturers, we are ACES. Find us at acesinc.com.
Radio Free New York on WYSL. AM 1040, FM 92.1, and FM 95.5 West.
All right, we are back here on Radio Free New York. I want to welcome all of the guests here on the live stream. Barbara, Carrie, Yolana, Dan, Jason, Beth, Brian, Albert, Carrie, and Kevin. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. All of our listeners on YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, and of course, everybody listening on the WYSL stations. Thank you so much for joining us here. We're just wrapping up the discussion about automatic voter registration. And what we kind of ended with is, listen, automatic voter registration can probably be fine. In fact, I think we should have automatic voter registration as long as you're automatically registered to no party affiliation. Then you have the option to change it later. And as long as we apply equal protection to all of our rights, which means if you're 18, 21 years old, and you want a pistol permit, it should have been automatically submitted for you, and you should have been automatically ready to go, basically. The idea of automatic voter registration is to, have you not show up at the poll and find out you can't vote. I think access to your Second Amendment rights should be the same way. You know, you go to make that purchase. They run a background check and say, yeah, you're good to go. There shouldn't be any, oh, well, did you know you need a pistol permit for this? Sorry, you can't have that. You have to go register. You have to go, apply. So I think automatic voter registration, let's do it, but let's also do automatic pistol permit applications. So, all right. So the big one to kind of talk about is going to be Nevada basically changing how the Electoral College works in the state.
It's an end run around the Electoral College. They can't get the necessary constitutional amendments, so they're going to try to do it by a state basis. Yeah.
So this is pretty interesting. This whole national popular vote coalition that's been coming together.
It's a really bad idea. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah, well, and what we'll talk about is if you go to this, we talked about already, we don't have a democracy, we have a constitutional republic. But say you do go to this national popular vote, that means really there's going to be like 4 cities in the nation that determine president. I mean, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be
in all major federal elections.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, kind of like how Alaska, they always vote last, and it's kind of already been decided. It's like, oh, look, Alaska's votes are coming in, and it doesn't really, the outcome has already been called, essentially. That's how it'll be for every single person in the United States that lives outside of these 3 major cities. Oh, New York, LA, and I forget what the next one is. Maybe
Chicago.
Houston, Chicago. Yep, Chicago. The results are in. Don't bother showing up to the polls. You can't change it anyways. That's really what this will turn into.
Yeah, really. I mean, people in Nebraska and Rhode Island and Arkansas and Idaho, you might as well just don't bother to vote. I mean, because your vote won't matter.
Yeah. And I think that this just has so many scary implications. One article led with this, which I thought was funny. It says, how does President Hillary Clinton sound? And for half the population, that sounds absolutely terrifying. For the other half, they're like, yeah, that's what we wanted.
I don't think it's half.
You're probably right. We talk about how many people don't vote, how many people aren't registered to vote. I'm sure the numbers.
People in Fairfax County, Virginia, in Central Park West, and in Hollywoodland, all believe that would be nirvana, having President Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just not
until she came back from her meeting with the trade talks with China and said, well, I'm really sorry, but we're now the United States of America, meaning 30 states. 20 of them now belong to China. I hope it all works out for you guys.
Yeah.
But I got a really good deal for it.
Sure.
They made the Chinese made a huge contribution to the Clinton Foundation.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, the Clinton Foundation, that's a whole other, that could be 3-4 radio shows all by itself. Absolutely.
But that's what you're talking about. You're talking about President Hillary Clinton, because everything would be for sale, including you.
Yeah. So just to kind of give people a rough idea, what's going on here is that you have electoral representatives in every single state. And when you cast your vote for president, you're technically not voting for president. And this is kind of like a weird concept. What you're doing is you're voting for your electoral, I don't even know what they're, representative, I guess, to vote for president. Those are actually the people that vote for president. So when
they're electors.
Yeah, they're electors. And so what happens is they look at the votes and then they cast their votes, usually in accordance with the people and how they voted. Now, I've read that they actually have the ability not to. The elector could actually choose to say, the majority of the people in New York State voted for Clinton, and instead I'm going to cast my vote for Trump or whoever it may be. They actually can do that. There doesn't appear to be a restriction against that. It just also doesn't seem to happen. So what's happening is, and I'll give you guys this background too, almost all the states in the United States are a winners takes all state, which means if your state has 6 electors, and 51% of your state votes for that candidate, all 6 of those votes go to that candidate instead of like 3 or 4 to the one that got 51% and the remaining going to the other candidate. There's only 2 states that actually split up their electoral votes, and that is Maine and Nebraska.
Nebraska's a weird one. They also have a unicameral legislature.
I don't even. That's the first time I've heard that. What is that?
I mean, it's just there's one house.
Oh,
there's only one house. They don't have an upper and lower house.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. So the other 48 states, is a winners takes all state. And what is happening is in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton actually won the popular vote, but she did not win the electoral vote. And so a lot of people got up and said, well, we need to eliminate the Electoral College. We need to abolish it. We need to
move the goalposts. We need to make it easier for us to win.
Yeah. So there was, now historically speaking, this doesn't normally happen. I think there was only 2 times in history that the electoral vote and the popular vote were not the same. So it is an outlier. I'll give them that. But
it's there for a reason.
Exactly. It is a fail-safe that has protected this country for a very, very long time. It protects you and your vote. So it's pretty interesting what's happening. So you can check this out. It's nationalpopularvote.com. They're the organization pushing to eliminate the Electoral College. So they're tracking all the various states and kind of what they've done, how it's passed, what states they're working on, pending legislation. And I read in an article that said, when I was reading about Nevada, it said, well, 12 other states have already passed this, and New York was in the list. I was like, New York's already passed this? Really? I didn't realize. So I went on this site, and sure enough, Cuomo signed this into law in 2014. 2014 is when in New York State this was passed, and then it was signed again, a renewal in, I think it was 2016, November 7th, 2016, to extend the deadline, because this is one of the few bills that was actually set to expire, which I think like every single bill we pass should have an expiration date. And if it's not renewed it should fall off the books. Different topic for another day, but I believe that's we have so many archaic laws. We have so many laws in general. The idea of having an expiration date is really appealing to me. And if it was a crappy law and somehow it got in with crappy legislators, well, guess what? Now that it's expired, people have to justify why they're going to vote for it again. And if it was crappy law, chances are it's not going to get voted for again. It falls off the books. So I'm in favor of that sort of thing. But yeah, so what I found most interesting is I expected, and all the states, by the way, that have adopted this kind of like eliminate the Electoral College thing. And I'm going to tell you what this actually means, because it doesn't eliminate the Electoral College. It actually takes away even more of your voice. And I'll talk about that in a second. This wasn't put forward by the Democrats in New York State. It was actually put forward by the Republican and Conservative Party in New York State. So this to me was like, I was totally surprised, taken aback. It would pass the Senate 57-4.
Oh my gosh.
And it passed the Assembly 102-33. Sponsored by Republican Senator Joseph Griffo, jointly with Democrat Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz. So here we got Republicans and Democrats.
Dinowitz is the operative term.
Working, working together. And then they've actually got breakdown by party endorsements, which is interesting. So Republicans supported the bill 27-2. Republicans endorsed by Conservative Party 26-2.
Oh my gosh.
Democrats 30-2. Democrats supported by Working Families Party 25-2. So this is just, to me, I was so surprised. You know, I shouldn't be, but I was, because all the media around this has been, you know, the Democrats are just upset about the 2016 election, so they're pushing this. And here we are, good old New York State in 2014. We were ahead of the curve, and the Republicans were the ones pushing it.
But it's okay, because Dean Skello's son got a really nice no-show job out of it, and they paid him like $175,000 a year to be rude to people.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah,
that's the way it's supposed to work, right? As long as I get mine.
Yeah. So now what I want to do for you guys is give you, when we come back from the break, I'm going to tell you what this bill actually does and what it means. And it's bad, guys. I mean, I've seen some bad legislation. This is just like, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So we'll be back here in a moment on Radio Free New York.
Your business relies on computers and technology to operate. Slow, unreliable networks and servers can cause unplanned downtime and affect your bottom line. The experts at Simple Tech Innovations are here to help. Their preventative maintenance program ensures that your computers and network are kept up to date and monitored for any issues, keeping your business running smoothly. They also help clients achieve HIPAA, PCI, and New York State cybersecurity compliance to keep your network safe and secure. Whatever your business IT needs are, Simple Tech Innovations should be your first call. They've won the best in Rochester 8 years in a row and have an A+ Better Business Bureau rating. Call them today for a free consultation at 585-200-3182. That's 585-200-3182. Simple Tech Innovations.
You're listening to Radio Free New York on the WYSL stations.
All right, guys. We are back here on Radio Free New York. I'm your host, Andrew Hollister, and we are talking about Nevada signing their bill to essentially ditch the Electoral College. Now, the thing is, this bill doesn't actually ditch the Electoral College. It does something that might be worse, to be honest. So give you guys a little background. If you're just joining the show, there have been a number of states, I believe the number is 16, that have signed this bill or a very similar bill in place. You could go to nationalpopularvote.com, check them out, read the language there. And essentially what's happening is there's been this push because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, Trump won the electoral vote, and this is kind of an oddball in history. I'll say that. I think it's only happened 2 or 3 times in U.S. history that this has happened. So
it happened in 2000, didn't it? With the Al Gore versus G-Dub 41.
Yeah, it may have been. I don't have the dates, but yeah, it is kind of an oddball thing. It happens, but very infrequently. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, we can't let this happen again. We need to push to eliminate the Electoral College. We need to go to popular vote only. And I say a lot of people, I don't actually know how many. It just seems to be coming up a lot in the media. The media wants me to feel like it's a lot of people. I don't know if it is or not. So what this bill does, and by the way, this was already signed into legislation in New York State back in 2014, and Cuomo renewed it in 2016. What this bill does is it takes the national popular vote, which means whatever candidate wins the election based on number of people who voted for them, and it wipes out all of your votes in your state and gives all of your electoral votes to that candidate. So, not saying that this would happen, but say for a moment in a far, far history in New York State, that the electoral votes were going to go to a Republican candidate. But the national popular vote was a Democrat candidate. New York State's electoral votes would essentially be wiped out and changed from Republican to Democrat.
And thus would ensue a huge federal lawsuit against these states, wherever it happened, to nullify that and to return it back to
how it was
where it should
before.
have been. No, it's not going to. It's not going to stick. It's unconstitutional.
Yeah, and you actually bring up a great point about the constitutionality of this. So the way that this law or legislation is written is this wouldn't actually take in effect until enough states rallied together behind it to create 270 electoral votes.
It's not going to happen.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that's the number you need for the states to all kind of do it. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. So for everybody who's like hearing this and like freaking out, I mean, it could happen. It doesn't look likely right now. But the interesting thing is, it's probably going to go to court if it does. Actually, I'm not going to say probably. It will absolutely. Somebody is going to bring it to court. I couldn't even say like it will probably. It will definitely go to court because the Constitution gives a state the power to determine how its electoral votes are awarded. But there's another clause that says states can't enter compacts without Congress's consent.
Right.
So they can't actually rally together and put this together without the approval of Congress anyways. Yet that's what they're doing.
Well, but I see another perverse ill effect from all of this. And that is, once again, as the progressives always do, they're trying to tear down the foundation stones of what has made this country great. And what they're trying to do is create doubt about the legitimacy of elections, which drives down the participation of people who really want to play it by the book. And instead, it puts the responsibility for the prosecution of an election and the honest tallying of votes in the hands of the progressives. So what they want is for all of you guys to say, you know what, elections are irrelevant, just like a lot of elections are irrelevant.
Yeah.
So it's just, it would be bad horrible for the country to have this all degenerate into just endless litigation, because what have we prided ourselves upon over, decades and generations? The peaceful transition of power at the time of elections. Yeah. If everything's going to be litigated, basically we turn into Venezuela, which is what the progressives like.
Well, and what's really interesting is a glaring example of this is New York State. I mean, we live in the prime example of where popular vote doesn't represent the majority of the state, of the property, of the land, and my guess is the people as well.
Of course.
Right? So if you look at New York State, if you look at a map of New York State based on the last two gubernatorial elections, you will see New York State is done by popular vote, not by electoral, in terms of our gubernatorial election. And you'll see Cuomo won all of 6 counties, maybe 6 or 7 counties. I forget what it is. Pretty low number. The rest of the state voted for somebody else.
But those 6 counties have most of the population.
Exactly. So what it then turns into is you have one person representing one geographical area. And this is actually something people bring up very often, their criticism of this. They say land doesn't vote, people vote. And I get where they're coming from, and I understand they want it to be one vote to one person, and I get that. But what happens is you get one person in one geographical area with a high population that dictates the way of life for the people across a vast geographical area. And that's what we have in New York State. That's what we have right now.
The death of federalism. Everybody is disenfranchised except the people who live in the most populous areas.
Yeah.
The fate of the country will be determined by Central Park West, by Washington D.C., by nut jobs in California.
Yeah. And so if we were to look at this once again in terms of New York State, you would see that upstate New York is very vocal about how much they don't like Cuomo. But then you see the next step, which they say, Oh, well, where were you on election day? Oh, my vote doesn't matter. You hear this all the time. So we've actually seen what this result would be. We're already living it in New York, and many, many times people don't realize that upstate actually has more votes than downstate does. Upstate could absolutely beat the downstate vote, but they don't show up and vote. And it's because they become disenfranchised. They've been beaten down, and just they believe that there is no way to win, that their vote does not matter, so they don't show up. And that's what happens.
And this is what the drumbeat that you hear from the liberal media in New York State all the time is, well, the Democrats have an insuperable voter registration edge over the Republicans, which... Even if that were true, it's not dispositive of the election because most of those people don't show up to vote.
Yeah.
So it's easily overcome if we would all, ladies and gentlemen, register and go out and vote every single time and take 5 or 6 people with you.
Yep.
And find guys at work or in your church or friends around the neighborhood or whatever who believe in that defeatist, my vote doesn't count because there's too many Democrats. That's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah. In New York State, we have extremely low voter turnout. I'm talking usually less than 30%, in some areas less than 6%. So if you think that your vote doesn't matter, guess what? When I went to my polling place 3 years ago, I think it was, I showed up around, I think it was like 8 o'clock at night. I was number 21. Number 21, all right? Only 20 other people came to vote that day. I went as late as I possibly could so I could know what number I was to know how many people showed up. 20 people. Tell you what, 5 or 6 people in that district who showed up to vote may have swung the election in that district.
People complain about the money that's spent by the public school systems and the bloated school budgets and everything else. The most recent school budgets, I saw votes in major Livingston County towns for school budget, and 189 voters.
Yeah,
showed up. 189.
Yeah, and they're
in a town of 6,000.
Yeah, and they're lucky they can vote on their budget. I live in the city of Rochester. I don't get to vote on my school district budget. We're one of the few in the states that we don't even get to vote on that. So when I hear that only 189 people voted, on how they could have their tax dollars spent,
it's millions of dollars.
Yeah, I sit there like drooling, like how could you let that go? Because I know exactly how I'd vote on my school district budget, and the fact that people just leave that on the table and decide that it's not worth going to the polls for 10, 15 minutes to have a say is really, really frustrating. It's really frustrating. But it speaks to the current upstate mentality, which is my vote doesn't matter, New York City's always going to beat me, or this other mentality that I've come across a lot lately, which is I only vote in the presidential, which to me is almost more frustrating because people aren't voting for the seats that are closest to them. People aren't voting for that local election who's going to have a say on your zoning, your property tax, your this and that. People are worried about voting for the guy who is probably going to impact their life the least, to be honest. As far as the presidential goes, there's very few bits of federal legislation that actually impact you in your home. But in terms of local legislation, that could impact how your garbage gets taken care of, whether your street gets plowed or not.
What garbage is taught to your kids in school?
Yeah, yeah, that's almost a state issue. But if you were voting regularly, you could impact those state issues as well. But here's another one: whether or not a stadium ends up in your backyard. These are the things that actually impact you every single day. And people go, no, I only vote once every 4 years for a presidential. And that to me is just mind blowing.
You got to get out there and do the primaries. You got to vote in the primary. Very, very critical.
No.
And your town and village elections and your school board votes.
There's a lot of them this year too. There's a lot of them for sure. So
these are the people who directly affect your rights. Like, for example, how you use your land.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great example. Maybe you want a shed in your backyard that doesn't infringe on your neighbor, doesn't infringe on anybody, can't even be seen. But if it's over a certain square footage, you need a special license or a special permit or something like that. And maybe you could have changed that if you just showed up to vote. And by the way, that permit and that license is going to cost you $100-$200 and a hearing, So the message is get out and vote, people. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me here on Radio Free New York. I think what we're going to talk about next time is going to be the Rochester City School District. I'll catch you guys next time.